All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today for New in Rainforest. We're excited to have you all here. For today's webinar, you'll have myself, Mary Kate, as your host. Alongside myself, we have our lead program director, Dave, as well as our lead engineer, Mache. We'll be going through some of the new updates that are within Rainforest. So for today, we do encourage this to be interactive. So please feel free to post any questions that you have as we go through this. We definitely want to make this an interactive experience for you. On the list of items we'll go through, we will talk through some updates within iOS and Safari, and then we'll go through embedded test. And then lastly, we'll save some time to do some Q&A. So with that being said, I will go ahead and pass it over to Dave, who will start with the iOS and Safari updates.
Good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. So we do have two new virtual machines available to you all. There's nothing that you need to do in order to gain access to them. They've already been added to your accounts. You can go in them and use them at will. So one is the iPad Air on iOS 14. So one more item that's available for you to test on. The other one is the Apple Safari 14 Technology Preview Mac 11 Big Sur, which it's a long title, but the interesting thing with that is that this is the technology preview that Apple makes available to developers. So this will be available to you. This is actually available to you now. You just have to go in and select it, and it's actually listed within your platform choices is Apple Safari 14 Technology Preview. But what this is the beta that Apple makes available to developers. So as they add newer versions of the beta, you need not look for a new beta. This will automatically update to the latest version. So we'll get notified of it, and we will make those updates as quickly as possible. So this will be available to you as they go through the various beta updates for Safari 14. Once it hits Safari 15, we'll create a new virtual machine with that. But for any of the Apple Safari 14s, as they continue to move up, this is what you'll want to use. So, and it will automatically be done for you. And that is all I have.
Cool. Thank you, Dave. With that, there is also a feature I want to talk about, which is embedded tests. So this is specifically about Rainforest automation. And if you use automation, or if you use anything in Rainforest, you probably know about embedded tests, but we've made some updates in the last cycle, specifically around how embedded tests work in automation. And that I would love to show you and talk about and explain some of the sort of less obvious features and use cases. And I will show you I'll just introduce what embedded tests are in case it's not completely clear, and I'll mention some of the scenarios where it will be where embedded tests are good to use, and then I'll give you a quick demo, explain everything, how it works and how it looks. And everything that I'm demoing today is already shipped to everyone. It's generally available. It's work that we've finished just before the end of last year, and some of you participated in the beta, so you've seen this feature for a while now. And then a couple of weeks ago, I think last week actually, we've released it generally to everyone. So everything I'm showing is already out there. But as I said, there might be some things that you haven't seen yet. So a quick intro about embedded tests. Basically, embedded tests are a way to encapsulate test flows. So what does it mean specifically is that if you have a test and it has a bunch of actions, and then a different test has the same bunch of actions, the same actions in the same order, that's a good place to use an embedded test. So the way you would do that is you would create a third test that contains only these actions that are common to the first two. And then in the first two tests, you would replace these actions with this one embedded test. So it's basically an abstraction. You're saying these, let's say 5 actions, form some kind of unit. They're like a logical unit of functionality, and it's repeated across tests. And then you can reuse it in a bunch of places. And you probably want to do that because of two reasons: maintenance and reuse. So reuse is kind of obvious if you're creating a third test that also needs to have these same actions. You don't need to create them from scratch. You can just embed the existing test. So that saves you time. But more importantly, it helps you with maintenance. So if your test changes and one of these 5 actions now needs to be updated, instead of updating it in 3 places, you can only update it in 1 place, and then the changes will be propagated to every word that use it. So that's probably pretty straightforward. I think most of you already know that. But one other thing that I wanted to mention is that even if your actions are not reused across tests, it might still be a good idea to use embedded tests just as a logical grouping. So if you have some actions that make logical sense as a unit, it might be a good idea to encapsulate them in an embedded test, even if they're not shared with any other test. So one common example is login flow, right? You have your app, and to test anything in your app, you need to log in. And if you didn't use embedded tests, every one of your tests would start with the same 4 actions. Click on the login link, paste in the email, paste in the password, and so on. And there's no reason to do that if you can reuse this functionality across. So with that said, let's jump into the demo, and hopefully everything. Oh, I'm sorry, I stopped sharing instead of stopping to present. So hopefully you can see the screen again. In the demo, I will show you a test that we have been creating during our last webinar, just at the end of last year. If you haven't seen it, that's no problem. And if you have seen it, I'm also not going to go through the same thing, but I'll just reuse the test because it's convenient. So in this test, we are testing Spotify. And specifically, we wanted to create a test for how to create a playlist and add a song to it. And the nice thing about this test is that we have added an embedded test, which is a login, just like I mentioned. So the way this test works is it logs into the app, and we'll see what's in there soon. And then you go to the player, you click on playlist, you add some Christmas songs to it, and so on. So the thing I wanted to show you today is this part. This is now different to what it used to be a few weeks ago. The way we're showing this embedded test is updated, hopefully more convenient. The first thing you'll notice is that action numbers might be surprising at first. So there's action 1, and then suddenly there's action 8. And that is because this embedded test, you can expand it now, see what's in there, and it contains a bunch of actions. And these are the sort of inner actions that also have numbers. And the reason for that is when you run this test, you'll have your results page with just a linear list of actions, one after the other. And there's no embedding concept in the results. It's just one action after the other, and they're numbered in the same way. So now if you have a failure in a specific action, and you want to communicate to someone, you can just give them a link and say, hey, look at action 34, and it will be the same across results and test editing, which is how it should be. So the other thing that I just mentioned is that you can expand this test. So that used to be sort of a black box. Previously, if you've added an embedded test, you had to sort of open this test manually to see what's inside. Now you can see it in the context of the parent test. So I'm going to be saying parent test as the sort of outer test, and child test as the one that's inside. And it's useful to see what's inside. As you can see, you can now sort of figure out what this test is doing. It clicks on this login link here and pastes email and password and so on. One thing to note is that you still cannot edit this test from this view. To edit the test that's embedded, you click on this link and it will open a new tab. And now this is the exact same test. And now it's editable. This is the view you dove into the that embedded test. And now you can edit it. You can move actions around and retake screenshots and so on. So that's the first thing we've changed. The other thing we've changed is that you can now, well, 2 more things, I think. First of all, you can select subsets of these actions and preview them. So right now, I've selected 2 actions from the inside of the embedded test. If I click preview, 2 of these actions will be executed and nothing else. That's also something that was not possible previously. You could preview the whole embedded test, but not a part of it. So that makes it a little bit easier to sort of have granular control. But also, what's cool, and that might be something that maybe you didn't realize yet if you've been using embedded tests before, you can now deeply nest embedded tests. So what it means is that you can start building up more interesting hierarchies of your tests. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to look at this accept cookies click action. So because we're testing a page that appears as it appears as the browser is located in Europe, you get this cookie banner. That's pretty big, and you probably want to remove it before you start testing. So I've just added in the login test, I've added an action to click on this button to accept cookies and move on. That makes the banner disappear. But there's something slightly off about it, just conceptually, in that there's a login flow, and it's kind of a separate concept from the cookie banner. So it might be nice to pull it out into a separate test. And in case anything about accepting cookies changes, you can update that without really thinking about your login flow. So to do that, I'm going to create a new test that has just this single action and embed it inside this test. So then in our top level test, we'll see there's a test embedded, and there's another test embedded within that. So I've created this test already just to speed things up. So this is a simple test, just has a simple action, simple action, accept cookies. So now let's use it inside our login test. So the way to do this is to add an action as if you were adding any other action. But if you keep scrolling past your list of actions, or you can just search accept cookies, that brings up a test that you can embed. So if I choose this, you'll see that it contains the same action that I've just had here. So I'm going to get rid of this one, and I will save my changes. So now I have this Spotify login test. Nothing changed about it except the structure. And if I go back to my top level test and expand login test again, you'll see that's now updated. It says that there are a couple of actions in this test, and action 6 actually comes from another embedded test that's accept cookies. So this is a pretty simple demonstration. It might seem like creating a test with a single action is a bit of an overkill. And in some cases, it might be, but in some cases, it might actually be a useful thing. If, for example, this single button changes often and you have the same button in multiple places, you might want to have, click on this button test as a reusable component to update to update it easily. And as we're talking about this, for those more for those of you on the more technical side, you're probably starting to see similarities between programming. And in fact, the more we sort of develop this, the more we realize that our automation is basically a programming language. It's a visual programming language, so it's not something that should discourage anyone from using it. But there are a bunch of abstractions and concepts that if you're on the technical side, it might be useful to think about it. And embedded tests are basically functions in that world. You create an abstraction over some functionality, and then you can put it in different places and reuse it easily. Cool. I think this covers everything that I wanted to point out. So if you have any questions, please shout. I would love to have a discussion about that. Otherwise, thank you so much for your attention.
Let us know if you have any questions about any of the topics that we went over. Feel free to post them in the chat. We'll hang out for the next few minutes to answer any questions that might come up.
One of the possibilities I was thinking is if you have, and it might be a bit of a tall ask, but if any of you have like a test suite that you would like to talk through, or even a web app that we could test live, we could do that. If you have specific questions about embedded tests, that would also be great. So yeah. Cool. Looks like everything is crystal clear, which I'm glad about. If anything does come up, if you think about it as you're creating your test suite and you realize, I wonder how I could do this, or is this a good idea? Please feel free to contact us. This is a feature that we've been thinking about for a while, and we've just released recently, but it has a bunch of implications. For example, the deep nesting that I've mentioned, currently it only goes down 4 levels deep. And from what we've seen, that should be enough for most use cases. But it's always a balance between power and usability. But if, for example, you run into that limitation, you would like to have deeper hierarchies, that would be very interesting for us to hear about. Or if there is anything else you would like to improve or change, we're always happy to listen.
So it does seem like that there are a couple questions that have been raised.
Oh, sorry, must have missed those.
Okay. Yes. So Michael is asking, you observe that RFA is becoming more and more like a programming language. Have you considered the following, such as commenting the steps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have. There's nothing right now on the immediate roadmap to go that direction. So let me just address those one by one. So Michael's asking about commenting, copying, pasting, conditional statements, and looping. Actually 3 things. So commenting, there's currently not a great way to do this, but that's basically one of the reasons I like embedded tests, because it's not really a comment, but if you extract a couple of actions into a test, you can give it a title, and that gives you at least some context about what this is doing. It's not 5 random actions, it's a login flow. So that's not exactly what you're asking, but it gives you, it's one way to sort of address that, to give some semantic meaning to a series of actions. Copy pasting is not something we've really looked at closely. So that's an interesting thought. We have some plans to make sort of working with embedded tests a little bit easier and sort of moving things around. Currently, you can select some actions and drag them around, but you cannot you cannot, for example, paste them across tests, which is a good idea. And then conditional statements and looping. This is something that's been actually flying around our heads and as an idea for quite a while. And I'm really sort of excited and scared of this at the same time, because it seems very powerful and cool. And I totally see a bunch of use cases for it. But it's also kind of scary to make it, to develop it in a way that's usable. We don't want to go like full developer tool route. We want to make sure that our product is also usable by people who don't have that background. But at the same time, there's definitely power in that. So we're still thinking about it. I don't know exactly what form it would take, but it's something that's definitely interesting. So another thing that Mike is asking is, if a step fails, could it be run? If a step fails without the test, could you run the test without that step? Oh, and commenting out. I see. So basically, you would like to disable steps one by one. That's not something we have considered, because it seems like if there was like every step in your test is probably required. So unless you get into conditionals, if there's a cookie banner, dismiss it. If there isn't, continue. Something like this would be interesting, and we have some slightly different ideas to deal with situations like this. But in general, if a test is there, if a step is there in the test, it should stay there. It is necessary, and it's kind of hard to imagine a general case where disabling a step would still keep the rest of the test valid. Cool. Thank you for the questions. That's it's an interesting thought experiment for sure.
I think we have time for a few more questions. If there's anything else anyone's curious about, let us know. And thanks for attending today.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll take silence as all questions are answered. Thank you, everyone. Please do, if there are questions afterwards, reach out to your customer success manager. Let us know if we can answer anything, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you again. Bye.